All right, let's dive into a project that gets people talking and debating like few others. Hedera. You probably know it as HBAR. We're going to look at the incredible promise behind its technology, and then we're going to look at the chaotic reality of its price.
So let's just get right to the heart of the puzzle. You've got a technology with backing from absolute titans like Google and IBM. I mean, come on. So why on earth is its price one of the most argued over topics in all of crypto? Let's unpack that.
To really get what's going on, we gotta rewind a bit. Let's start with the official story. What was Hedera even designed to be in the first place?
Okay, so at its core, Hedera is a public distributed ledger. You can kind of think of it as a potential next-generation version of a blockchain. It uses a type of proof of stake to keep things secure, and it's built on this really unique algorithm called Hashgraph.
Now, the vision for all this comes from computer scientist Lehman Baird, and his goal? It was incredibly ambitious. He wanted to create a successor to the blockchain that was fundamentally faster, fairer, and more secure. Yeah, a pretty tall order. And this is where it gets really different. See, while a blockchain bundles data into a chain of blocks that miners have to validate, Hashgraph just gets rid of blocks and miners completely. Instead, the nodes on the network use this wild protocol called gossip about gossip to share information. It's designed from the ground up for crazy high speeds and super low costs. And that kind of tech, it attracted some serious heavy hitters. The whole network is overseen by a governing council that includes names like Google, IBM, and Deutsche Telekom. So, we are not talking about your typical crypto startup here. This is a project with massive corporate credibility, which for some, that's a sign of stability. But for others, it kind of raises questions about centralization.
So you've got this amazing technology and these giant corporations on board. You'd expect a clear, straight path to the moon, right? Well, let's switch gears and look into the crystal ball of market predictions to see how all that potential translates to, reality.
It's really no surprise that with its unique tech, some of the long-term price predictions are just incredibly optimistic. We're talking about people looking decades into the future and seeing some big numbers. So, for example, based on user-submitted data over on Binance, the predicted price for 2028 is hanging around 24 cents. Now, if you look even further out, all the way to 2040, that same user prediction jumps up to over 58 cents. And by 2050, the forecast hits over 86 cents. Now, obviously, this is all just speculation, but it definitely paints a picture of huge potential down the road. Okay, so you see those wild long-term numbers floating around? It makes you wonder, what's the feeling on the street today? And boom, here is the massive conflict. Data from CoinCodex shows that the current market sentiment is just overwhelmingly bearish. We're talking 83% bearish. That is a gigantic disconnect between that far-off optimistic vision and the short-term reality.
And we've got to pump the brakes for a second here because it is so important to remember where this prediction data comes from. Binance puts a huge disclaimer on it saying, quote, "Data displayed are purely based on user input. It is not Binance's opinion and should not be construed as advice." So yeah, this really hammers home how speculative this all is.
Okay, so we've got this world-class technology on one side and this deeply pessimistic market on the other. This brings us right to the core of our explainer, a tale of two pressures, and the why behind this whole disconnect.
An analysis from a user on the Hedera subreddit, I think, just hits the nail on the head. They wrote, specifically for Hedera, we are in an era of supply pressure. Okay, so what in the world does that actually mean? Well, according to this framework, there are 4 big things pushing the price down. First, the network itself is selling HBAR to fund its operations. Second, it's also selling HBAR to fund other projects building on the ecosystem. Third, the staking rewards have been pretty low, which pushes some investors to look for better returns somewhere else. And finally, you have these accelerated token unlocks, which basically just means more and more HBAR is being released onto the market. But that's not the end of the story. Proponents believe we're eventually going to shift into an era of buying pressure. How? Well, for one, as the network gets used more, revenue could grow, and that could mean higher staking rewards. Then, as the supply cap gets closer, you get scarcity. Also, when all those free HBAR grants run out, projects will actually have to buy it on the open market. And finally, you might see projects move over from other networks when they hit their own tech limits.
So where does that leave us? With all these forces pulling in opposite directions, where does Hedera actually go from here?
When you boil it all down, the conflict is crystal clear. On one side, you have a powerful enterprise-grade technology with a grand vision for the future. And on the other, it's clashing head-on with the very real, very powerful market forces of supply and demand.
And that brings us to the ultimate, unresolved, million-dollar question that frames this entire debate. Can Hedera successfully make the jump from this current era of intense supply pressure to a future era of buying pressure? The answer to that single question? Well, that's going to determine everything.